Have you ever built something so carefully, so deliberately, only to watch it taken from you in a single moment of silence? That's what happened to me, except I didn't just watch. I acted. My name is Eric Dalton. I'm 45 years old, and for the last year, I devoted everything, my time, my network, my health, even my family, to bringing a $60 million international deal to life. A deal that would have redefined the global footprint of Valcrest Global Apparel. And just 48 hours before it was set to close, I was removed, not by a conversation, not in a meeting. By an email sent through the CEO's assistant. No warning, no thank you, just a sentence. We've decided to restructure your position. I sat in my office, hands on the signed documents, the kind of documents that move markets. And in that moment, I realized something. They had made one critical mistake. They thought I was working for them, but the deal wasn't theirs to take. What happened next? Let's just say it changed everything. If you value control, redemption, and justice, stay with me. Like, comment, and subscribe, because this story is one they never thought would be told. My name is Eric Dalton, and I'm not the kind of person who chases the spotlight. I've always believed that real power moves in silence. For the past 2 decades, I've operated behind the scenes, helping companies scale internationally, broker complex partnerships, and close multi-million-dollar deals most executives only dream about. I wasn't flashy, but I was effective, and people in the right rooms knew my name. Before Valcrest, I had built a career based on precision. I came up in the old-school New York apparel industry, learning how to negotiate with legacy distributors in Europe and navigate customs laws in South America. I'd built relationships, not just contacts, earned trust, not just signatures. When companies hit a wall in foreign markets, they called me. Not because I promised miracles, but because I delivered results quietly, consistently, and with a focus on long-term value. Valcrest Global Apparel found me after a particularly messy market exit in Singapore. Their U.S. division was bleeding cash and losing international leverage. Their founder, Harold Langley, a man I'd long respected, wanted someone experienced to clean up the mess. But he wasn't the one I met with. Instead, I sat across from his son, Marcus Langley, a freshly minted CEO with legacy in his blood and a phone glued to his hand. He smiled like a man used to winning by surname, not skill. Still, I accepted the role. I wasn't naive. I knew Marcus was young and eager to make his mark. I also knew he lacked depth in global strategy. But Harold had made me one promise: autonomy. I could build as I saw fit. No red tape, no office politics. Just results. And that, I thought, would be enough. So I got to work. Within 3 months, I'd cut deadweight contracts, renegotiated outdated distributor terms, and opened exploratory talks with Rhinewest Group, one of Europe's largest sports apparel conglomerates. They were looking to expand into the U.S. market, but wanted a trusted operator who could scale quickly and protect their brand. That operator was me. I worked with quiet discipline, early flights, late nights, missed birthdays. A canceled vacation with my daughter Lauren, who was 14 at the time and had just made her high school soccer team. She was the reason I took this job in the first place. After my divorce, stability mattered more than ambition. I wanted weekends with her. I wanted to show up for once. That was the trade-off: give Valcrest everything now so I could be more present later. But life rarely honors that kind of bargain. From the beginning, Marcus played the part of the supportive CEO. He praised my initiative in board meetings, invited me to strategic calls, and asked for advice he rarely followed. I thought he was just green. What I didn't realize was that he was also watching me, studying the influence I was building, the relationships I was forging, and the autonomy I'd been granted by his father. And slowly that admiration turned to competition. He started questioning expense reports that had already been approved, shifted my assistant to special projects, scheduled all company meetings during my Rhinewest calls. The signs were subtle but familiar. I'd seen insecure leaders before, men who feared being overshadowed more than they feared losing revenue. Still, I stayed focused. I told myself the results would speak for themselves, and in the world I came from, results were everything. What I didn't know then was that Marcus wasn't waiting for me to fail. He was waiting for the perfect moment to remove me and claim the win for himself. That moment would come just 2 days before the most important deal of my life. And when it did, he didn't even deliver the message himself. Because when men like Marcus fear your power, they don't confront you directly. They remove you quietly, and they pray you stay silent. But I wasn't built for silence. The Rhine-West deal didn't start with a contract. It started with a conversation over espresso in Munich almost a year before the firing. I'd met Annika Berger, Rhine-West's CEO, 5 years earlier when she was still running their Scandinavian expansion division. Back then, we worked on a modest distribution deal involving a boutique cycling brand. She remembered that I didn't overpromise, that I was efficient, discreet, and always followed through. When she reached out about Rhine-West's plans to enter the North American market, I knew the opportunity was real and massive. Rhine-West wasn't just any player. They were Europe's answer to Under Armour, with a rapidly growing base in Germany, France, and the Netherlands. Their performance gear was built with military-grade tech, and they wanted an aggressive yet precise entry into the U.S. market. But they weren't looking for a flashy announcement. They wanted infrastructure logistics and a trusted negotiator to minimize noise and maximize control. That's where I came in. I didn't loop in Valcrest right away. Instead, I scoped the landscape. I ran numbers. I talked to potential warehousing partners and quietly analyzed Valcrest's supply chain performance. The company had decent logistics, but they were operating on a dated model. Their distribution center in New Jersey could barely handle the holiday rush, let alone the scale Rhine-West was projecting. So I had to build something smarter. That's when I activated my consulting vehicle, Dalton Partners LLC, a fully registered legal entity I'd been using for years for site advisory projects. It wasn't a shell company. It had a bank account, an address, and a flawless legal structure that allowed me to conduct due diligence and execute non-binding term sheets without entangling Valcrest prematurely. This wasn't done in secrecy. When I first signed on with Valcrest, I had specifically negotiated the right to retain Dalton Partners for selective consulting. The clause was buried in the appendix of my executive contract. Marcus never bothered to read it. Every meeting with Rhine-West moved the needle. We tackled regulatory approvals, adjusted warehousing timelines, and reviewed tariff impact scenarios. Every single negotiation, every draft, every call ran through my office. I worked out of hotels, airport lounges, and even Lauren's school parking lot on more than one occasion. I sacrificed sleep routine and social life. All of it was to build something bulletproof. By month 7, we had a draft agreement that would give Rhine-West exclusive North American distribution rights via Dalton Partners, with Valcrest as the designated fulfillment partner. That distinction mattered. It meant that while Valcrest would handle storage, shipping, and retail deployment, the contractual relationship, the power remained in my hands. The moment the deal closed, Dalton Partners would become the gatekeeper for Rhine-West's U.S. presence. It was a win for everyone, or so I thought. Valcrest would gain instant international prestige and tens of millions in annual revenue. Rhine-West would gain a flexible, discreet launch strategy. And me, I'd gain leverage, the kind no corporate reshuffle could touch. But I didn't see it as a weapon. I saw it as insurance. My intention was to keep Valcrest in the deal. I never once planned to take it elsewhere. That wasn't who I was. Yet somewhere along the process, Marcus started circling. I noticed his sudden interest in international operations. He began asking for summaries of my progress, with Rhine-West summaries he never read. He invited himself to strategy calls and would show up 20 minutes late, distracted, asking irrelevant questions. And then he started delaying internal sign-offs, creating process reviews that did nothing but slow us down. Still, I pushed forward. The final documents were in hand. Rhine-West was ready. The execution window was set for Thursday morning, and once the final signature hit the deal, would go live. Everything was in motion. Everything was ready. And then came the silence. Jealousy in the corporate world doesn't wear a name tag. It doesn't punch a clock. It seeps in, quietly hiding behind smiles, titles, and polished boardroom language. Marcus Langley never confronted me directly. That wasn't his style. His strength didn't come from vision, It came from bloodline. As the founder's son, he inherited the title of CEO before he ever earned the weight of leadership. And while he wore the suit well, he never liked competition, especially from someone who didn't need the spotlight to be powerful. At first, Marcus pretended to be supportive. He congratulated me in team meetings, casually asked about progress with Rhinewest, and publicly praised the strategic leadership I brought to Valcrest. But behind the scenes, his posture shifted. His tone, once collaborative, became clipped. He stopped inviting me to leadership roundtables. He forgot to CC me on key internal memos. When he did speak to me, it was all smiles and half-interest, as if he were mentally 2 steps ahead, plotting moves I wasn't yet meant to see. Things escalated when I learned that Marcus had hired his cousin, Jordan Langley, into the company under the vague title of advisor to the executive team. No one on my team knew what Jordan actually did. He had no resume, no background in logistics or international business. But within weeks, I noticed he'd been granted access to my client folders. He began shadowing meetings under the pretense of alignment. He even requested a copy of the Rhinewest contract draft, citing legal review. I pushed back politely but firmly. I reminded Marcus that all external agreements required my approval per my employment contract. He responded with a charming chuckle and said, "Just keeping the family in the loop." That line stuck with me. It didn't sound like a joke. It sounded like a signal. The pressure mounted. My budget approvals were suddenly delayed. Marcus began insisting on dual signatures for high-ticket expenses. My dedicated assistant, Clara, who had worked with me since day one, was reassigned to Talent Initiatives, a department that barely existed. Her replacement, a quiet junior analyst with no experience in vendor communications, reported directly to Jordan. It was a slow unraveling, not a termination, but a suffocation. The final straw came during a board dinner. I was presenting early projections from the Rhinewest Partnership modest numbers that would double Valcrest's international revenue over 3 years. The board was impressed. Several members congratulated me personally. But when Marcus stood to speak, he didn't mention my name once. He referred to the deal as a team effort and attributed the success to Valcrest's collective culture. I watched him raise a toast to the future, one he clearly hoped wouldn't include me. The irony was, I hadn't tried to take anything from Marcus. I didn't want his seat. I didn't care for politics. My loyalty was to the result, to the architecture of something lasting. But in his eyes, my competence was a threat. My independence, an insult. The more the board listened to me, the more invisible he felt. He didn't need a reason to fire me. He just needed an opportunity. That opportunity came 1 week before execution, when I was overseas finalizing warehouse inspections with Rhinewest's logistics team. While I was in Hamburg touring their facility, Marcus scheduled a closed-door meeting with HR and Jordan, and when I returned to New York, I found a memo in my inbox. No subject line, just a PDF with my name on it and the words, "Position eliminated. Strategic realignment." No conversation, no context, just elimination. It was a move that screamed insecurity, and in hindsight it revealed more than Marcus intended. He didn't want to compete with me, he wanted to erase me. But he hadn't read the fine print, and what he failed to understand was this: when you try to cut out the architect, the foundation doesn't crumble. It adapts. The day I was officially removed, the office felt colder than usual, not in temperature, but in tone. I arrived early as always. The final execution meeting with Rhinewest was set for Thursday. It was Monday morning. We were 72 hours from closing what would become the most significant international deal in Valcrest's history. My calendar was full of back-to-back calls with compliance teams, freight coordinators, and legal advisors. Everything was lined up. Everything was ready. And then at 8:37 a.m., I received the message. It didn't come from Marcus. It didn't even come from HR directly. It came from Angela, the CEO's executive assistant, who looked visibly uncomfortable as she knocked on the edge of my open door. She handed me a sealed envelope and said quietly, "I was told to give you this. I'm sorry." Inside was a formal memo signed by both Marcus and HR's director. The language was sterile, rehearsed, strategic restructuring of leadership roles, operational efficiency, appreciation for contributions to international strategy. At the bottom, in bold effective, immediately your position is terminated. Please vacate the premises by 5:00 p.m. today. There were no performance concerns listed, no misconduct, no failures to cite, just elimination, like removing a paperclip from a drawer that no longer needed organizing. I stared at the words for a long time. I wasn't shocked, not entirely. The signs had been mounting for weeks, but something about the timing, the method, it stung. Not because I lost a job. I'd lost jobs before, but because this one mattered. Not just for me, but for the people depending on it. My team, my daughter, the partners who trusted me to deliver. I sat in silence for several minutes, watching New York unfold beyond the 27th floor window. Taxis, pedestrians, coffee carts, all of it moving without pause. Meanwhile, I was being paused, shelved in the middle of the most important professional moment of my life. But as I sat there, something sharper than anger cut through me. Clarity. Marcus thought he was pulling the rug out from under me. What he didn't realize was that the floor he was standing on was mine. Because the deal he assumed Valcrest owned, it wasn't theirs. From day one, the Rhine-West agreement had been structured through Dalton Partners, LLC, my consulting entity. It wasn't just a handshake arrangement, it was legal, documented, verified. Rhine-West had agreed to enter the U.S. market under the Dalton name with Valcrest listed as the fulfillment partner. That distinction, often overlooked in hurried readings, was crucial. The legal contract specified Dalton Partners as the primary contractor. Valcrest was never the client holder. They were the logistics arm, the muscle, not the brain. And since Marcus had just terminated me, that meant Valcrest no longer had a formal link to the deal. In severing ties, they'd unintentionally cut themselves out of a $60 million opportunity. That morning, instead of clearing my desk, I picked up my phone and dialed my attorney. Then I called Annika Berger, Rhine-West's CEO. She answered on the second ring. "Eric," she said, "I've been meaning to reach you. We heard something unsettling from your office this morning." I told her the truth briefly, calmly. "Does it affect our agreement?" she asked. "No," I replied. "In fact, it makes it cleaner. The contract remains with Dalton Partners. Valcrest's role as fulfillment can be replaced." There was a pause, then a breath of relief. "Frankly, we were having doubts about Valcrest's capacity. If you can secure another logistics partner, we're prepared to move forward without them." I looked down at the termination memo still sitting on my desk. "Consider it done," I said, "because when a man tries to steal what's yours, the best revenge isn't fighting back. It's proving he never had the power to take it in the first place." After hanging up with Annika, I sat at my desk and stared at the city. The skyline had always calmed me, its rhythm, its brutal clarity. That morning, it felt like something else entirely, a mirror. Ruthless, unflinching, honest. I wasn't in mourning. I wasn't even angry. I was calculating. The Rhine-West deal wasn't dead. It had simply shed its skin. Valcrest was no longer involved, but the core remained intact. The contract was valid. The client was on board. All I needed now was a new fulfillment partner, and fast. There was no room for ego, no time for theatrics. If I was going to salvage this deal, it would require precision. That meant leaning on my Rolodex, my instincts, and the lessons I'd spent 20 years collecting in conference rooms and cargo docks around the world. So I opened my laptop, pulled up my short list of high-capacity logistics firms, and sent out 3 emails before noon. Only one responded within the hour. Axion Logistics. I'd crossed paths with them years earlier during a failed pitch for a sportswear brand in Southeast Asia. At the time, they were too new, too aggressive, still trying to prove themselves. But they'd grown since then, quietly, efficiently. I'd heard whispers that they were seeking a major entry into North American retail distribution. They had the infrastructure, they had the hunger, and more importantly, they didn't carry Valcrest's political baggage. By 2:30 p.m., I was in Axion's Midtown conference room seated across from their VP of Partnerships, Maya Chen, a former Amazon logistics strategist turned private sector powerhouse. She didn't waste time with small talk. "We read your outline," she said, flipping open a tablet. "We're interested." "But it's a tight timeline." "Very tight," I nodded. "Rhine West expects a finalized fulfillment transition in less than 48 hours. They're ready to move if we can deliver capacity and continuity." She glanced at her team, then back at me. "We can handle both. Our Jersey facility is underutilized and our warehouse tech is light years ahead of Valcrest, but we'd need exclusivity at least for the first 2 years." "Done," I said without hesitation. "And I'll commit to performance bonuses tied to efficiency metrics. You hit the benchmarks, you win bigger." That got her attention. She smiled. "You came prepared." "I don't bluff," I replied, "and I don't have time to circle back. This deal is real. This client is real, but so is the window. We either move now or we miss it." Within 3 hours, her team was drafting a logistics handoff proposal while mine revised the master contract. By 7:00 p.m., the language was finalized. Axion would step into Valcrest's place as the fulfillment partner, no interruption to operations, no delay to the timeline. The Rhine West deal remained intact, fully controlled by Dalton Partners. If anything, it had become stronger. That night, I sat in my apartment with a glass of bourbon, flipping through old notes on the initial strategy. It struck me how ironic it was. Marcus had spent months trying to squeeze me out of the frame, convinced that the company's prestige would carry the deal without me. But prestige doesn't close. Relationships do. Trust does. And I had never once lost that with Rhine West. He thought I'd go quietly. He thought I needed Valcrest to win. But what he didn't understand, what most men in power never do, is that leverage doesn't live in titles. It lives in execution, and I had just executed the pivot of my career. The next morning, the phone calls started. At exactly 9:03 a.m., my screen lit up with Marcus Langley's name. I let it ring. He called again 5 minutes later. Then came the email subject line in all caps. "Urgent, Rhine West contract status." He was panicking, and I knew why. Word had reached him that Rhine West was moving forward without Valcrest. He finally understood what he'd done and what he'd lost. At 10:15 a.m., I picked up on the fourth attempt. "Eric, we need to talk. Right now," he said, his voice sharp but tight with control. "I don't work for you anymore, Marcus," I said calmly. "This isn't about titles. It's about salvaging a $60 million deal. You can't just walk away. I'm not walking away from anything. I'm completing the contract with the client I brought to the table. You developed that relationship on company time," he snapped. "That makes Rhine West a Valcrest asset. I brought Rhine West to Valcrest, not the other way around. And you severed that relationship when you terminated my employment. Read the contract, Marcus. Dalton Partners is the primary contractor. Valcrest was listed as the fulfillment partner, nothing more. Silence. Then this is a setup. You planned this. I planned to protect myself. You chose to ignore every clause that mattered. That's not strategy, Marcus. That's arrogance." He hung up. 20 minutes later, I got a call from Julia Hines, Valcrest's general counsel. I respected Julia. She had always been precise, professional, and reasonable, one of the few people in Valcrest's leadership I never had to explain myself to twice. "Eric," she said, tone measured. "We've been reviewing the Rhine West documentation. Marcus is claiming you violated your non-compete." I assumed he would. "Do you have the original agreement with that clause?" "I do. And it clearly exempts pre-existing relationships, including Dalton Partners consulting clients." "We'll need to verify that. I'll send it to you within the hour." But Julia let me be direct. "The deal moves forward tomorrow at 10 a.m., with or without Valcrest." There was a pause. "Eric, the board wasn't aware of your termination. That decision came directly from Marcus." That caught my attention. "You're telling me the board didn't authorize this?" "No. And based on what I'm seeing, several members are concerned." "Then I suggest they review the paperwork Marcus ignored." That afternoon, while reviewing final logistics specs with Axion, I received another call. this time from James Weldon, a senior board member. We'd only spoken a few times, but I knew he carried weight, internally old-school numbers. First, no patience for chaos. Eric, I've been reading the contracts. Tell me plainly, did Marcus know Dalton Partners was the legal primary on this deal? He had access to every document. Whether he read them or not is another question. Weldon exhaled through the receiver. I had a feeling. Look, the board is meeting first thing tomorrow. This decision has broader implications. If everything checks out and if you're willing to consider it, we'd like to bring you back in. Officially. I didn't answer right away because in that moment I realized something. I didn't want to come back. Not to a company that tossed me out the second I became inconvenient. Not to a leadership team that let a CEO operate unchecked. Not to a brand that only saw my value when the money was walking out the door. Mr. Weldon, I said finally, I'm open to future collaboration. But if Valcrest wants to be part of this deal now, it's going to be on different terms. As a partner, not as my employer. He didn't argue, because even he understood what Marcus never did. Once you fire the man who built the bridge, you don't get to dictate who crosses it. That night, I didn't sleep, not because of stress, but because my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Half a dozen current and former Valcrest employees messaged me privately, some offering congratulations, others quietly asking what had really happened. But one message stood out. It came from Laura Mitchell, the VP of Finance. She'd been at Valcrest for 9 years and was one of the few people who'd always kept her head down and her books clean. She sent only one sentence, "If the board asks, I'm ready to talk." The next morning, as I finalized the last shipment logistics with Axion, I received a brief update from Julia Hines. The board had met. Marcus had been called in, and things had taken a turn he hadn't anticipated. Apparently, the board had begun a full internal review, not just of the Rhine-West termination, but of Marcus's entire pattern of executive behavior. The firing of a senior director without consultation, the insertion of his cousin Jordan into a critical advisory role with no qualifications, and the systematic redirection of budget away from essential departments toward personal ventures had finally reached critical mass. For months, Marcus had been redirecting marketing funds into a side project, an influencer branding startup quietly co-owned by his college roommate. He'd pushed this project through under vague language in quarterly expense reports. Lara had flagged it internally twice, but each time the issue was buried before it reached committee level. Now, with the board's attention fully engaged, that burial was no longer possible. Julia called again later that morning, her voice low but steady. "Eric, we've confirmed everything you said. Dalton Partners is the primary entity on the contract. Marcus failed to disclose multiple conflicts of interest, and the termination was enacted outside his authority. Are you telling me the board is considering action they're doing more than considering? There's an emergency vote this afternoon. Several members feel this isn't just poor leadership, it's ethical misconduct." I didn't say anything at first. I'd spent months keeping my head down, building something worthwhile in a system that was quietly sabotaging itself from the inside. The difference now was that the sabotage was no longer hidden. It was documented, traceable, legal. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about accountability. At 3:20 p.m., I received a call from board chairwoman Evelyn Cross. She rarely got involved in operational matters, but now she was fully present. "Mr. Dalton," she began. "First, let me apologize. What you've experienced is not reflective of Valcrest's values nor of how we treat strategic partners. I appreciate that I said carefully. I've reviewed the full Rhine-West documentation. You acted transparently, legally, and with more foresight than most executives in your position ever show. Then you know I never intended to take anything from Valcrest. The deal was structured to protect all parties, including your own. We know, and we want to make this right." She explained that Marcus had been placed on immediate leave pending investigation. The board had moved swiftly to contain the fallout, but it was too late to reclaim the Rhine-West contract. That ship had sailed. I told her as much. "We understand," Evelyn said, "but we'd still like to work with you, if not on this deal, then on future initiatives." And one more thing, Laura Mitchell is submitting a formal report to compliance. You may have started a much-needed reckoning here. When the call ended, I looked out the window and felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not pride, relief. Because for once the system hadn't protected the title. It had protected the truth. By the following morning, the board had voted unanimously to remove Marcus Langley from his position as CEO. The announcement was quiet, buried in a generic press release about leadership realignment, but inside the company, everyone knew the truth. His downfall wasn't dramatic. It was administrative. Paperwork had taken him out. Not rage, not scandal, just the cold weight of responsibility he tried too long to avoid. Shortly after, I received a final call from Evelyn Cross. Eric, she said, the board is prepared to offer you a revised role, something more reflective of your actual value. Head of Global Partnerships, full autonomy. Profit-sharing equity, a seat at the table. I didn't respond immediately. A week ago, I might have said yes. I might have taken the title, the package, the applause. But something had shifted. I had already executed the Rhine-West deal through Dalton Partners. Axion was already shipping product. My reputation had grown stronger outside Valcrest's walls than it ever did within them. And most importantly, I was in control of my own outcomes now. Evelyn, I said carefully, I appreciate the offer. But I've already built the thing I needed. I'm not looking to go back. I'm looking to move forward. I understand, she said. But if you're ever open to collaboration, I'm always open. But not as an employee, as an equal. The distinction wasn't rhetorical. It was foundational. For years, I'd helped companies grow from within, offering my best, thinking my best effort, only to watch lesser men get the credit. Now the platform was mine. The risk, the reward, the responsibility, mine. And with the Rhine-West deal secure, I had leverage to choose my next partnerships, not beg for them. That afternoon, I signed 2 more letters of intent with international brands that had been waiting to see how the Rhine-West deal would play out. They weren't interested in Valcrest. They were interested in me. And that was the moment I understood something Marcus never could. When you spend your life building bridges for others, it's only a matter of time before you realize you can build your own kingdom. And once you do, you don't return to the castle that once locked you out. I didn't build Dalton Partners to seek revenge. I built it because I knew that one day someone would try to take credit for work they didn't do, someone would try to replace what they couldn't replicate. And when that day came, I wanted to be ready. This story isn't about taking back what was stolen. It's about never handing it over in the first place. In today's world, leverage doesn't come from titles or corner offices. It comes from understanding your value and protecting it with precision. The moment I stopped working for people who couldn't see past their own egos, everything changed. I had time for my daughter again. I had peace, and most of all, I had control not just over my schedule, but over my legacy. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own quiet victories or near defeats, drop a comment below. Some bridges are worth burning if they lead you back to yourself. And if you found power in this story, tap, hit subscribe, and stay close. Because the next chapter, it's already being written. Your story might be next. Just make sure you own it.